All right. Welcome to episode 60 of the Jake Blanchard podcast. Two quick shout outs here. Stream2c.com. They make sunscreen and personal care products. They were recently featured as the #1 all natural sunscreen on the market by Rolling Stone magazine. Go check them out at Stream2. That's the number 2CSEA.com and use the code JBP at checkout. Get yourself 10% off your order. Also, always giving love to the good people over at Fellowship Brand. They make premium men's grooming products. Take care of your beard, take care of your tattoos if you've got them. Join the Fellowship. Go to fellowshipbrand.com. JBP at checkout also gets you 10% off your order. My guest today on episode 60 is Dr. Serena Sterling. She has a doctorate in clinical psychology, and she focuses on understanding how repressed emotions can cause chronic pain, inhibit recovery from injuries, and identifying on how to release emotions to alleviate that pain. She has an incredible story about how chronic fatigue syndrome changed the entire path of her life, from journalism to a leading practitioner treating mind-body disorders, tension, psychosomatic conditions, and stress illnesses. Her book, Pain, a Love Story, is a deeply personal story woven into various case studies and patient work that she's done, driving outcomes. And I'm looking forward to discussion. Also, I'm looking forward to sharing my perspective because her and I did a session yesterday prior to the interview, and I can't wait to unpack that. Dr. Sterling, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Jake. What an amazing intro. Was that actually me?
Yeah.
So well.
Hey, I get fired up about the intros because, the journeys that people go through, their perspective on life, the skill sets that they acquire, it's hard to deny. You're undeniable. Like you're out there, you're doing big things, you're doing interesting things. And so before we dive into that, you're joining me from Oregon today. Is that correct?
Yes, Portland, Oregon.
Portland, Oregon. How long have you been out in Oregon?
This has been over a year and a half, but I've been in Oregon on and off for 10 years. I came here for college, stayed on another year. I was here for 5 years, and I left for 8 years, and I came back, did my postdoc. Here for 2 years, left, went back to California, came back, up in Seattle for 5 years, came back to Portland, but now I'm going to go again forever, never coming back.
Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting time being there on the West Coast of Oregon, specifically around Portland. So it sounds like you're a free agent for cities you might end up in. Is that true?
Yes, and now that I moved all my clients online a few years ago, even before COVID hit, so I can really work anywhere because I see people remotely.
Oh, that's wonderful. Hey, and I've gotten to know you a little bit over the last couple of months. What I'm really interested in kind of starting this discussion around is journalism. Like my understanding of your career. And you and I actually got an opportunity to sit next to each other on an airplane once and have a fairly long form conversation. I was absolutely fascinated to hear how passionate you were around starting a career in journalism, kind of a dream job, and then strongly pivoting into this world of clinical psychology and working on chronic pain. And so maybe you can give us a little bit about your background, where you're from, what interested you in journalism, and then what caused this pivot.
Sure, good question. So I grew up in Philadelphia, lived there until I was 18, and then I had done a writing workshop at Lewis and Clark College the summer before my senior year of high school, and absolutely just fell in love with Oregon and how beautiful it was, and it was so different from the East Coast. So I applied and got into Reed College. That's where I went for undergrad. And then I people just have like a direction in life, and I didn't. I did not know what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I really liked writing. So I was like, well, I really like magazines. And I just started to go in that direction of like, well, and my goal actually was to create my own magazine. But it was still geared towards something around like adversity. Like, how do people have that resilience? How do you, like, what happens when you are faced with an injury? And how do you bounce back from it? So that was going to be my ultimate goal. But I ended up going and doing a master's in international journalism in London. And while I was over there, I focused on health journalism and like mind body stuff. I was always interested in that. And then I did an internship at Spirituality and Health magazine in New York City. It was part of the curriculum, and then they hired me. And so I moved to New York City in August 2001. And then 3 weeks into my professional honeymoon, I was late to work on September 11th and finally got to my stop, Wall Street Station. And by the time I got to street level, it was a complete wait out. And I couldn't see more than 5 feet in front of me. Um, and I think I probably went into shock when I was on the subway because we were just not allowed out, and there was no one on the platform, and there was smoke, like, and I just didn't know what was going on. And so then we got out, and it was kind of like, I don't know exactly, but I think that your body just goes into some sort of shock, and it's kind of like, okay, just go through, like, you're in survival mode now. So the first tower had fallen by the time I got out. And then just throngs of people in silence in New York City were moving away from lower Manhattan. And I saw the second tower collapse. And it was pretty traumatic,
Yeah, absolutely.
obviously. How could it not be? But I ended up getting extremely tired afterwards. And I was a little bit tired in London also. And I think that was because I was studying things like mad cow disease, and then foot and mouth disease came out while I was over there, and I was getting a little disgusted by the food. And then I was like, what if I get mad cow disease?
Yeah.
Terrible death. So I had a really bad diet of just like carbs and sugar and alcohol. And it was in a, like it rains all the time. It was just like not a really good combination. And then I got to New York, and I remember going to the World Trade Center. They had this huge underground mall, and I would go there for my lunch break, and I would come back and I would be so tired that I would kind of like slump in my chair and take like a power nap. And that's not normal, but I didn't even think about it. And then after 9/11, I just got so tired, and I was working from home because my office had to be cleaned. Like all the ash from 9/11 came through the vents in the ceilings, and just like it took 5 months to clean that.
Yeah.
So working from home, I was like, I'm just going to take a nap on the couch for like 3 hours. So I went to my medical doctor. He diagnosed me with chronic fatigue and then told me there was no cure. Just learn to cope with it. Stay away from sugar and
So,
caffeine.
can I stop you there?
Yes,
So
please.
chronic fatigue syndrome is just like, is there do we know, like, is there a preponderance of medical evidence of like why people experience chronic fatigue, or sounds like this is an area, but as we're just defining things as part of the conversation, I think it's important to just talk about what is chronic fatigue.
Well, I think that medical doctors in particular, and if you are an MD, I totally respect you. However, I think that there are some diagnoses like chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia in particular, where doctors don't fully know what caused it. What are all like fibromyalgia more so than chronic fatigue? You have a whole like bunch of different symptoms like fatigue, but there's joint pain. Gosh, there's like so many others I can't think of right now, but they just kind of like, well, we don't know, so we'll just clump this over here. We don't really
Oh,
have a really good prognosis, and we don't know how to heal this. So, but we'll give a diagnosis because doctors don't want to not give a diagnosis. So chronic fatigue is just like, I mean, it's just this inability to feel well rested. You could sleep for 10 hours and still be tired. And like for me, I could walk around the block and need a 2 hour nap. And
wow.
I like just lost all of my drive. I just did a master's. I was like working on my dissertation. Like I was completely zapped. Um, and so as far as like knowing more about it or how it happens, like doctors, he didn't really know how to explain how I got it. And because he was like, there's no cure, he didn't know how to heal it. Um,
Okay. So then that must have been a pretty heavy weight to take on. Here is a diagnosis. By the way, we don't necessarily know a whole lot about this. A lot of mixed feelings in medical literature. Were you prescribed anything, or were you given any kind of like regiment or anything along those lines from traditional medicine?
no, the thing is, he never really asked any questions. He wasn't like, what do you do for work? Where do you work? What's your sleep schedule like? Like, how much are you exercising? What's your diet like? None of that. He just was like, okay, so you're tired. Like, tell me about your symptoms. And then I was like, when I came back the week later and he gave me the diagnosis, I was like, great, now we know what it is. Let's heal this. How do we
Mhm.
heal it? And he's like, oh no, there's no cure. And I was like, okay, well, how about some stimulants? Because I need to stay awake. And he was like,
Yeah.
no, that's even worse. You don't want to be doing that. And I was like, well, you don't have any answers. What kind of doctor are you?
That's
And
that's got to be a difficult conversation to have. So, like many people who, I guess, are diagnosed with something that's got some ambiguity around it. Obviously, my thought here is that kind of makes you a researcher, right? That makes you somebody who's trying to solve your own problems because the onus becomes on you. There's not a great way to describe how you can heal. Is that what piqued your interest in this category, or did you start finding other people with similar conditions? Like, what was the catalyst to shift your career?
I I had already, so when I was 9, I was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. And my experience is that I created that for myself. This is just a side tangent,
Yeah,
but
let's do it.
so when I was 8, like my birthday is in January, so I was diagnosed like in early January at 9 years old. But at 8 years old, I basically complained about pain that never existed because I felt that was the only way for my parents to finally give me attention and see me as equal with my brother, my older brother. And this is what I consider the nocebo effect. Like the effect is like you take you take something, it's like sugar water, but you truly believe it's going to work. You're not told that it's sugar water. You're told that it's like this amazing cure. And then there's this activation in our brains that happens that I don't think doctors fully understand. And it's this miraculous thing, but you can turn it on yourself if you fully believe in something. So I fully believed that I was going to have pain, something visible in my body. Um, and within a few months, I started to have more pain and stiffness. I couldn't do all the sports I was doing. And then I was diagnosed with it. And so I've always had this interest in this mind body connection. I understand that if we're master creators and we don't realize it. I did it consciously when I was 8, but oftentimes it becomes unconscious when we hold on to an emotion that we're not expressing. And so I really felt like, I'd been seeing chiropractors since I was 14, and I'd been introduced to this one technique while I was still in college in Portland. That really, like, I was still interviewing people for this dissertation I was writing, and this one journalist that I interviewed was like, you should go see a psychologist. I mean, like, you kind of went through a lot when everything you saw on 9/11. You should go see someone. But it was so stigmatized in my family to go see a psychologist that, like, I went there and I was like, I was like so guarded. I didn't find it helpful at all. And so the technique that I remember being introduced to in Portland, I was like, I think this is going to help me. I think that, like, I tried to cry on the night of 9/11 and nothing would come out because I was just so, like, stunted with being able to express my emotions for so many years. And so I had this huge hunch that my emotions, if I could figure out how to release them, that I could probably heal. So I looked for someone in New York City who does something called neuro emotional technique. I found her, I told her about what was going on. And even from the first phone call, she was like, this is like a pie. And the fatigue is one slice of it, and the arthritis is another slice of it. And so it's all connected. And I was like, wow, like, just hearing that was like a nice understanding explanation. And then I went and, like, the first session, I was so much better that I walked back to my apartment, which was 3 miles, which I hadn't been able to walk 3 blocks. And so I yes, like, a lot of people can become complacent and be like, oh, I guess I just have this thing for the rest of my life. Oh, well, poor me. And their life ends in a certain way and they have to, like, become um, someone who's sick and can't get better. But I was like, that's not an option for me. I have to find answers for this.
So then, a logical conclusion here, that's what got you into the field, right? As far as like deciding that you're going to take up the baton and help yourself and also help others. And what's that journey been like?
Well, I wanted to learn this technique because I was like just so impressed. And I was like, that was, like she got me better. Not just the technique, she did like supplements and she had me on a really strict diet, which in my early 20s, I looked at it and I started to cry because it was so strict. But I was so desperate I was going to do anything. So anyway, she got me better in 3 weeks when this medical doctor was like, no, here's your life sentence. Like you won't be able to be the same again. So but it was the technique of like identifying these repressed emotions that I couldn't even access myself, lifting them up, and then allowing me to feel so much better in my mind and body. That was so inspiring that I was like, I want to learn that. But in order to learn it, I had to have a higher degree in one of the healing arts, which included, well, medicine, but acupuncture, chiropractic, naturopathy, or psychology. And I really researched all of them, but I was like, you know what? I've always been fascinated by how the mind can cause us to feel bad in our bodies and vice versa. So that's what led me to putting my journalism career aside. I was like, I'll come back to this. I might do some writing later. I'll be freelance. And then I moved out to San Francisco to pursue my doctorate in psychology.
And so the specific fields that you work in, so the NET you just mentioned before, there's a there's several different techniques or types of like kind of healing work that you do with folks. Maybe you can unpack that a little bit. And then also like what are the stigmas around it? I know we talked a little bit about traditional medicine versus kind of this like holistic healing, but like what's your perception as you've progressed? And obviously you'll be biased because this is your field of study, but I just kind of love to hear that maturation of perspective that you have as you've been in this field for 20 plus years and deeply entrenched in it.
Okay, so that was two questions, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I've been asking two questions a lot. So, I mean, I think we'll start with one. What is the body of work included in some of the things that you do? Like, what are the methods, the tools, the things that you've learned and that you apply to individuals?
So this NET, it was developed by a chiropractor, and I had to learn, like when I went through all the courses, it was something outside of my traditional psychology courses. But it includes things like Freud has this thing, or he had this thing called a repetition compulsion. It's kind of like if you are single and you keep dating the same guy, girl, whatever, it's because it somehow was comfortable. It was like maybe, you grew up in a family where your father was a certain way and he wasn't great. He was maybe demeaning and condescending, but then you end up with these men who are the same way. That's like you're repeating, you have this compulsive way of repeating the same patterns. So that's a theme. That's one of the things, kind of principles in NET, but it's also brings in applied kinesiology, which is muscle testing from Goodhart, who was a chiropractor. He developed that. There's some homeopathy, which is like cures or like cures like kind of thing. It's just kind of like all these different techniques kind of rolled into one, but it really works. And so I use NET as a tool, but I also combine it with everything I've learned, all my training in clinical psychology, making these ideas of like, okay, so this is the emotion we're finding. Now we're going to trace it back to an earlier time when something similar happened. It didn't get processed. So we're going to process it now. And then I can use my psychology training to make the connections of like what the client isn't seeing. So I think that just doing something like a talk it out approach, especially if someone has a pain, an injury that's not moving, that's not helpful. Just like if you have a trauma, if you keep talking about that trauma and you don't do anything with it, it honestly feels like re-traumatization because it's not moving the trauma along. You're just kind of like spinning your wheels. And so for me, it was just I really like combining NET, some other techniques, mind body techniques with the psychology because it really lifts things that you can't necessarily identify just by thinking about it and wondering about it. So
Mm.
I have like when I teach people tools so that they can help themselves, it brings in things you can do for yourself. But when I'm like specifically doing my own technique, it's kind of like identify the things that are so unconscious that you wouldn't be able to do it yourself.
Oh, wow. And then, the second half of that question was around perception from the traditional medical community. So like, that's why I've spent the majority of my career working for hospitals and health systems. I understand where kind of holistic medicine fits in the confines of traditional medicine, which is very kind of swept under the rug. There may be kind of an Eastern medicine clinic or some types of clinics that show up, but it's certainly not the majority of traditional treatment paths. So, like, what is that? Help me build a bridge here on when people should consider seeking someone like you out and why.
I've had clients that have gone through 12 doctors and then they end up working with me, and they have um, doctors are mainly about chasing the symptom. And so for instance, you could take various medications. You could eventually get surgery if, say, you had back pain, but the back pain will come back if you haven't actually addressed the root cause of that. So if it's purely physical, then I mean, like if I fell out of a tree and broke my leg, I would go to the hospital right away. Like, but if it was like something chronic, that is the last place I'm going, because I've gone to the hospital and they just want to treat me with medication, or they just medications have side effects, and that's not what if like. So I did. I mean, I can use my own example of like years ago when I was graduating from grad school, gave myself the the present of going to the Caribbean to what's that one? Bonaire, the ABC Islands, Aruba,
Okay.
Bonaire, Curacao. Bonaire is known for being really good at windsurfing. Like they have the sandbar, and I was trying to like learn how to water start. And it was really shallow water. So I kept hitting my heel into the sand really hard, and it just got really bruised, and I could hardly walk back through the airport. I went to the urgent care. The doctor told me that I had a stress fracture in my heel. I needed to be on crutches. He put me in a removable cast. I was in San Francisco. I don't know, but like walking up and down hills without crutches is
Oh,
challenging.
for sure.
So I then tried a cane, and apparently like no one actually knows how to use a cane. I had to like watch how you put your weight on the side of the leg. Like it was a it was a crap show. So
Oh, you
um,
can curse.
it
Don't
was
you
a
worry
shit
about that.
show. And I then went to my chiropractor who does NET. And in 3 sessions, I was 100% better, because there were so many emotions wrapped up in windsurfing for me that it's just by lifting those energies, like emotions are energies. We lifted that, we identified what the things were that I was repressing. And like even after the first one, I was like, wow, I feel better. Second one, like I didn't need the crutches. Third one, completely better.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. And so there are limitations to everything we do, like everyone. But I feel like if someone has gone through the medical hamster wheel, which it can be at times, and they're not getting better, and they keep trying different medications, even if it's for like depression or anxiety, like sometimes develop a tolerance to that, and you have to like increase the dose. Or you could like figure out what the emotions are, where this started. Like you're not born with anxiety. So when did this develop?
Exactly. And I think this is a pretty good segue to go into the time you and I spent yesterday, and won't dive into too many specifics, but I just want to reflect on, if anybody's listening to this and they're like, man, this kind of sounds a little nebulous. It does to me as well. And you and I spent an hour yesterday, maybe a little more than an hour yesterday, talking and using a method that you applied and trying to get to the center of some of the pain that I have going on. I can tell you one, I feel lighter today. And I told you that before we got started. I truly do. I feel like you honed in so quickly on some things that I needed to not only talk about, but to alleviate from my day to day. So I'm extremely appreciative for that. And I can tell you that it's hard not to go into a session like that with skepticism. Like it's hard not to be like, okay, well, like what is this? Because there's a lot of noise out there. But I can tell you that the things that the stones that you turned over were no mistake, at least in my mind. And without kind of unpacking, exactly what they were, they're things that I need to focus on right now in my life, and to help alleviate some of the stress that I have going on, to kind of sit with myself on things that are unresolved from my past. And so I thank you, one, for your time, but two, maybe you can kind of talk about the method that you applied, and is what we did traditionally what you do, or is it a subsect of it? Like, help me understand.
Well, it's my thank you for having me on the show. And I just really wanted you to have that experience. I'm so glad that you feel lighter. That's often what people report after going through this. And so basically, let's see. So I work with people with where they're at. So they come to me with a symptom, and it's either physical or emotional, and we just go in with that. And so all those symptoms are just symptoms when I work with someone. Like, we're never. It's maybe like 5% physical if it's a physical issue, but it's often leading us to the emotion that needs to come up at that time. So I've had people have been like, no, I think that like what I need to work on is from my childhood. And I've been like, okay, well, let's just see what the body wants to release, because the body is so wise. And
Yeah.
like we could lie to each other right now and just make up all this bullshit. But basically, when I'm asking your body for answers, it never lies. So it basically unlocks what it needs to release in order for you to take the next step to feel better, either in your body or your mind.
And you had me touching different parts of my hand and touching my head and doing some other things and you're kind of reading some things that were going on through that discussion. And again, hard not to be skeptical, but outcomes are everything. And I had a really great evening, really long conversations with my wife last night, as I was kind of unpacking some of the things that we discussed. And yeah, I would encourage anyone to do that. In fact, for people who are listening to the podcast, you're offering 2 sessions. Is that right?
Yes, to any viewer that decides to take me up on this offer, it's a free session. The value is $275, and you go to my website and you fill out the application, and make sure to say like where it's one of the questions is, if it wasn't a podcast that you found me, which podcast, be sure to mention Jake's podcast, and then I'll get back to you and I'll give you a direct link to schedule that.
100%. We'll include that in the comments in the podcast as well. But I couldn't recommend it enough, especially just to explore. I mean, that's the thing. That's the whole point of this podcast and these long form conversations and dialogue, is to look for blind spots in your life, look for things that people are doing that could help you progress as a human being. And again, this is adding to that ever-growing lexicon of things that I'm learning, and things that I think I need to explore in a much more meaningful way. Because if I feel good after one day, maybe there's an opportunity to progress around this and see what I can unlock. So again, thank you for your time with that. The next thing I wanted to talk about was your book, Pain, a Love Story. Fascinating. And I have not finished it, but I certainly have read some of the case studies and look through some of your personal accounts in here as well. Maybe take us through the inspiration of the book and how it's structured and what you got out of writing it.
Well, my motivation, ever since I did my master's in journalism, I remember thinking like, going through my degree in psychology will just give me more clout for what I want to write later. But I didn't know what I wanted to write later until a few years ago. And I remember signing up for this really intensive public speaking course called heroic public speaking. And Michael Port is the guy that runs it. And he was telling everyone, he was like, why are you playing so small? You all have these amazing stories to share. You have these amazing messages to give everyone, and you're just playing small. You're not doing anything with it. You're not getting out there and talking about it. And it's something like, you have to like watch some of his videos, because he has just this way of inciting this motivation. And I remember being like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to write this book. And the reason that I was holding back was because my personal story talks about how my family was a little bit, I would not even a little bit, I would say they were more on the toxic side in terms of like a bit narcissistic. And if you come from a narcissistic family, you don't have room to be you. You always have to be like kind of playing to what they want. And so I didn't want to write it in a certain way to make them upset. But then I had to remind myself that like so many of my clients, I can see myself in them, because they come from similar families where they had to repress their emotions because emotions weren't encouraged. And then I ended up with pain. And so many of my clients end up with physical or emotional pain because we're not heard and seen in our families. And so that's even like why I called it Pain Love Stories, because I believe that so many of our issues in life are due to our relationships, of whether they're platonic or with a colleague or with a significant other, like how we show up in them, what we feel we're getting from them, if they're like codependent or whatever, like that totally impacts us and can leave us in emotional or physical pain.
Wow. And then what's the response been to the book? I mean, you've had it out for how long now?
It was officially published in February, and I obviously wanted it to do better. I'd want more like reviews and more people finding it, but it did really well with the pre-launch, and I've had some good reviews. And most people say like it was a page turner, like they couldn't put it down. And that's like such a good compliment, because I wrote it like that. I wanted people to be able to like read a few chapters, but it wasn't kind of like you could pick it up in one chapter. You don't have to read it from the beginning to the end. And it's written, yeah, I've had good feedback for the people who have read it.
And then what was your process in writing? Did it all just hit the page, sit down and just grind it out? Or was it, a very like strategic design of how to compose this book, and then like sitting down and compiling?
I worked with a really amazing book coach. Her name is Anne Shibani, Sheybani. And she initially asked me to answer some of her questions of like, why do you want to write this book? Who is this book for? Like stuff like that. But then she would ask me things like, okay, just every memory that comes to mind that is salient in your memory, write about that. And because I have a background in writing, the writing part wasn't difficult at all. And then we would meet and we would talk about, okay, what is like interesting or what is unique about this story, or what, and I didn't want to write it as like a 7-step process at the end of the book. Or the chapters, like, what did you learn from this? How to move? Like, I just wanted to be very
Yeah.
more like a friend of mine who I actually met in journalism school in London. She read it. She's actually French, and she read it really quickly. And she was like, it was just like you were telling me a story about your life.
That's what I noticed. It's very conversational from a reading standpoint. It doesn't feel like a necessarily like a textbook, or that you're actually like reading case studies. It really does feel like you're getting in tune to life experiences and kind of understanding. And it's diverse in the case studies enough where it's easy to find something that's relatable. And that's what I really kind of enjoyed about that. And so, I'm interested specifically in the process of putting case studies together, and the way that you did. And what was that process like? What was it like reaching out to those individuals and asking them to put their stories in the book? And then like, yeah, how did you get there?
I was thinking about all the cases where it was really where I would find something like, there was one case, for example, where this woman came and she just had so much anxiety that she was on the verge of panic attacks. And her results were so amazing that I felt like that needs to go in the book. And it was a really short chapter, but it was kind of like, she was the woman where when I was working at a clinic, I came into the waiting room, didn't see her. 10 minutes later, I told my receptionist, like, hey, can you call her? Like, I'm not sure why she's late. She was like, she's in the waiting room. She checked in 5 minutes early. And I was like, no, that's not her. Like, that's her. And so I walked up to her and I was like, oh my God, how do I not recognize her? And so her like whole, she looked different to me. And she said that like after the session, she went home, she slept for 14 hours. And the next day she like drove to the grocery store after not driving for 3 months. She did like loads of laundry. She cleaned, and she decided to like create her own cleaning company called OCD Cleaning. But
Wow.
like things like that, where I was like, okay, let me look back at all the clients I've worked with thus far and see things like that where people had these really good results, and also find like one or two where they didn't have the results I was looking for, and look at like what happened there, like why didn't they get the results. And so I just wanted to like, and then the way it organized it was to kind of do a story from my life. I'm sorry, but my dog is snoring in the background.
No, totally good. What's your dog's name?
Alchemy, the canine alchemist.
Alchemy, the canine alchemist. Well, he's getting some Z's. I like that.
He's hopefully having a good dream.
For sure.
um, but yeah, so I organized I weaved the client case stories with like something that was kind of similar to my life, so that eventually as people go through the book, they can start to think of things in their own life of like, oh,
Yeah.
like remember like Serena wrote about that case story or about her own life, and it didn't. And I even like, I say like I have a doctorate in this clinical psychology. I like have all these training mind body symptoms, and sometimes my own symptoms go right past me. Like I don't even see it until I start to like put the pieces together. And that's what my hope is for other people, is that like you have some sort of issue and you're like, oh, what's going on in my life? Or what happened when this issue started? And then you can do this yourself. You don't need other people.
Mm. And so we're in a very interesting time right now. I mean, 18 months or so ago, this country shut down in a lot of ways. People went inside. They had a lot of time to spend with themselves. They had a lot of time to spend away from others, outside of their normal routines in life. And I think that made a lot of people uncomfortable. And I certainly know people in my life who kind of like really disappeared, or maybe have developed anxiety, depression. Just they're having a harder time kind of coming out of the cave, if you will. Would you consider the last 18 months to be a traumatic experience for people, maybe a blind spot for many, that maybe symptoms in their life have shown up that they're not addressing or they don't know they should be addressing?
That's that's a really good insight and a really good interesting question, because you could do one or two things: either really go inside and excavate all that landscape that normally we have the internet or our phones, or we have all these distractions. And when and that's the other thing you could do, is just like watch Netflix all day long,
Right.
or just numb yourself with alcohol since you're home and just can't go to the bars and stuff like that.
Margaritas at 9 in the morning. I'm not gonna lie. I may have done that once or twice.
And that's totally acceptable. It's just when you like do it all the time and it becomes a problem, right? So I saw a funny meme that was like, why go back to the bars? Like I like the pours I do at home.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So in the same vein of thinking, like there's certainly negative behaviors that can persist in order to maybe treat these symptoms that, if you're not in tune to, it can and really manifest in some negative ways, at least from my perception.
Yeah, absolutely. And the people that come to me that are really like the ideal clients, they are ready to work on their stuff. The people that don't want to look at like what they're bringing to the table and just want to blame other people, for example, or they just are kind of like, and I've had people where this is too intense for them. And I've been like, well, we can just like focus on the present. But even that, even the fact that I can find things that they're not aware of and then look at that under the microscope, like they don't want to do that. It's some people are more appropriate for more of a talk it out approach where they're like, oh yes, I have issues with my mother. And they talk about that for a year. It might not even be your mother though. It could be something else if you do more of like this kind of work. So I think that with COVID happening, and some people could start to read more books and like unpack this and like really look at like what's going on in my life. Am I happy about this? Am I not happy about this? How do I want to change it? Like, let me put in the work, versus people who are like, I don't really want to deal with this. I'm just going to like put on the blinders and, wait it out. I mean, there are two different or multiple different, there are probably many other ways, but those are the ones that come to mind.
Yeah. And then let's temper expectations. And like you said, people have to be ready. What does ready mean? Let's kind of drill down that vein, because that's an interesting word to me.
They know that there is something, a block. They're not completely happy with what's going on, and they are prepared to do the deep work necessary to look at themselves, look at how no one wants to, like, I don't want to be out of my comfort zone, for example. I don't want to look at how I'm showing up with other people that doesn't look great. And I have to work at it to do something different, but we get very set in our ways and we think we're fine. And so, I mean, I even know people from grad school that like, they have the same degree as me and they don't want to do the work. They're happier being on the surface and not looking at how they show up in a way that is not the best way that they could. So you have to be ready to look at how to show up differently. What are you going to do to like take the steps to change your behavior, to change your ways of thinking, so that you can end up like, it's not going to be, I mean, and the stuff that I do, like it's quick though. Like you don't have to stay in your muck for a long time. It's just like a session. You just kind of like, it's kind of like a wave. Like when you're crying, you're like, oh, this feels terrible, but like it doesn't last forever. So you have to be okay with feeling uncomfortable in order to get on the other side and be more comfortable.
I was just on it's funny that you kind of brought up a wave or in the moment while you're crying. I was on it's kind of a segue. I was on a 9-mile run the other day. I don't usually run long distance, but I was running 9 miles, and about 4 miles in, which is typically where I stop when I run, I had every excuse that popped into my head, every insecurity, every self-doubt, every like, man, you haven't run 9 miles in forever, if ever. Like, why are you doing this? Why don't you like just stop now and just walk back? Or like, all the different anxieties that come along with the commitment that you just made to yourself. I imagine it's a similar experience when you start doing the work and you don't know what it's going to be like to get to the other side. Like that fear, that doubt, that anxiety, that frustration of stirring up all the dust and not knowing what it's going to mean moving forward. How do you help people cope with that idea of a better future self, but the discomfort of dealing with things in the moment?
Well, that's a good question. You have really good questions, Jake.
I appreciate that.
I help them by kind of going through what I described with that, like you have to be uncomfortable to be comfortable. There's even this quote of like about ecstasy, of like welcoming the uncomfortable.
The drug or the feeling?
Good question.
Sorry, I digress.
I wish I had it close by. Do I have it? No, it's like this really cheesy cover of a book and a really cheesy title called Love Me, Love Yourself.
Okay.
With like the earth and like, it's basically from the like late 70s, but there's this one quote about like, in order to welcome in that feeling of being ecstatic, of being in that place of ecstasy, you have to be open to welcoming in all those feelings of discomfort. And you're going to go, if you want to really get to that place of being ecstatic and feeling like really good in yourself, you will go and you will find those people who will not just agree with you and be like, oh yeah, you're great and you're wonderful and don't worry about anything. And no, you're going to find those people who are going to challenge you to step up to the plate and see yourself in a different way. And it's not going to, just like you told me on the plane, like you should take cold showers, like
Yeah.
it's not, life's not comfortable. So why are we trying to like train ourselves into just doing everything that's going to be nice and comfortable and cozy and warm? Like you have to go through a dark night of the soul sometimes to get on the other side. You can't necessarily feel amazing joy and happiness if you've never been through sadness and depression.
I agree 1,000%. I'm and that cold shower conversation. I mean, I didn't start doing that until about 2 years ago. Anytime I feel complacent, or anytime I feel really stressed, or anytime that, cold showers are great. These cold showers, they wake you up, they force you into a state of dealing with something. They push your capacity for dealing with things. It is a 3-minute reset that can absolutely be applied to so many areas of your life. You're not going to get hypothermia or frostbite or anything like that. There's no real negative symptoms uh, of taking a cold shower, except for it's cold and you have to deal with it. And it's such an analogy for so many things in life. And a lot of the points that you're touching on here, which is there's going to be some discomfort. Hopefully, through the methods that you're using, we can time collapse this in a very structured way to help you start making progress against those traumas, against that pain, against that chronic, whatever fatigue, or, whatever psychosomatic, diagnosis that an individual has. And this is one approach, or many approaches that you may apply, that goes in your tool bag. And you should explore these types of things to make yourself stronger, so you're more resilient in life. And so that you can help others as well, right? Because once you help yourself, you can help those around you and start elevating the world a little bit. Let's think big. Let's go out to the world.
Absolutely.
So, what's in store for the rest of the year? What do you got going? What are you excited about? Are you out there speaking again, or like what do you got going?
Well, Jake, I saw one of your stories where you on, I think, Facebook or Instagram, where you were giving a talk to.
Yeah, Boise Metro Chamber for sure. That was a fun talk. Just kind of talking about consulting and project management and my journey as a human. So I did enjoy that.
Yeah, and I love hearing about other people's stories. Like, I feel like that's why I wrote the book and the way I did. Like, here's my personal story, even though I have this degree and this experience, like, I wanted it to be relatable. I never want to come from the place of like, oh, I have a doctorate in psychology and I have all the answers and like, I'm going to let you struggle kind of stuff. Like, and
Yeah.
so I would love to, I've listened to you on some of your podcasts. I listened to the one that Haley had about how you got started, and it's so fascinating to me to hear people's stories. And so I do want to get you inspired me just from watching your story to like get back into speaking. I'm moving to Boise in like 2.5 weeks. Um,
Whoa, that's right. Yeah. And I'll see you when you get here, sometime around the 24th, 25th, something like that, right? Of July.
mhm.
How
um,
cool.
Gonna tour around Idaho a bit, and I'm just gonna get settled in a place that's sunnier,
Yeah.
safer.
Nine months of rain a year over in Oregon can't be that fun, right?
Right.
No,
Uh,
no disrespect to Oregon, beautiful state, but
Beautiful.
we like it here in Boise.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to just keeping my space open enough to like my practice open so that people can find the resources and get the help they need. And personally, I just love exploring and traveling. And I used to travel abroad, but that's a little bit on hold right now. But
Sure.
yeah. And what
So
else?
what's the best place to find you online, and then yeah, social media, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, you can find me on my website. It's drdrserenasterling.com. If you're interested in working with me, you can fill out an application. If you've heard me on this show, you can definitely fill out the application and mention this podcast, and you'll get a complimentary session. And you can find me on Instagram. I'm on Facebook, but I can't actually access my business profile because I had a little mishap with
Oh,
Facebook.
are you in Facebook jail?
I got deactivated, and then
Oh no, that's gonna have to be for another podcast, man.
so if you wanted to find me and communicate with me, you could go through my website or through Instagram.
I love it. Hey, well, again, I want to thank you for your time. I'm so excited to see you when you're in Boise in the next couple of weeks. Looking forward to connecting and showing you around the city as well. And then looking forward to hopefully people reaching out to you after listening to the podcast and taking you up on your offer here. And thank you for making that available. And thank you for spending some time with me yesterday as well. This was an absolute pleasure to hear your perspective and your field of expertise, and looking forward to talking again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, cheers.